Good morning, everyone. Seth here at Wondering Gaijin Tuning. I posted up a couple days ago or yesterday. I forget the flight. This got me kind of shuffled. Um, about a shop that's just doing subpar work, and I normally don't do this, but within the last month and a half, 2 months, I've had multiple of my old clients come to me with issues that should have been at a novice level of tuning, and this particular shop that can identify himself, or I'm sure it won't be too hard to figure out, should be better than this. So thanks for watching this video. I'm going to talk about things I found on this particular R34 GTT on this last trip to Okinawa. I'm going to talk about the car previous to that, the tuner could not get started due to failure to read the manual that comes with the Haltech, which is one of the most friendly plug-and-play systems in the world. And the point of the video is not to bash it in the shop, it's to educate you guys out there to choose your tuner. There's a lot of people that claim to be able to do shit and they can't. And those are the guys that you typically find that the car doesn't run right. They lock their tune and they won't unlock it. They meet very simple questions with rebuttals or anger. And I don't mean like you calling them out on something they've done, but like, hey, how do I adjust my fuel pressure on this fuel pressure regulator you installed? Met with, why do you want to adjust your fuel pressure? Because it's my car, dude. Maybe I'm working on it. Maybe I need to adjust the fuel pressure regulator. Maybe something happened with the fuel pump and I changed fuel pumps. So thanks for watching this, and I hope you guys learned something. Take care. So we're going to jump into some of the issues I've seen come out of this shop in the very recent history. I've cleaned up a lot of issues from this shop over the last 10 years when I was living in Japan and had a shop there. So issue number one, client from about a year ago, prior to me leaving Japan, is doing a conversion for his wife from a S15 Type S to an S15 Type R. And they're doing kind of a mild build, but with the right components. So one of those components was this Haltech Elite 1500, also using the plug and play adapter box and a wiring specialties harness built for the OEM connector. So they wanted the OEM connector on the custom harness to go into this adapter box and then go from the adapter box to the 1500, likely for future upgrade reasons or changing ECU brands out in the future. You know, whatever their reasoning or justification was, that's totally fine. So we provide the parts. 10 months later, I get a phone call from the husband. He's not irate, but he's a little bit upset. He's definitely stressed. You can hear it in his voice. They're getting ready to move out of Japan to another country. And the accusation by this particular shop in Japan that he's now working with is that I built them the wrong harness. I ordered them the wrong harness. Okay, so he wants a copy of the original order to wiring harness specialties so that they can cross-reference the pinouts and figure out what the problem is, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm dealing back and forth with him. I'm trying to recall this order from almost a year ago, trying to find the actual order number to wiring harness specialties in my emails. And it dawns on me, and I ask him, did this shop read the manual? Right? And he's like, I don't know. I'm like, there's a jumper configuration that has to be done in this plug and play harness. And it's in the manual if the tuner actually knew what he was doing or read the instructions that come in the bag with the adapter. So you can see all of the supported models here with the Haltech plug and play for this particular plug and play adapter, right? And in the fine print here, it says that all calibration and development was done on a Nissan S15 Australian delivered or Australian direct market. There's our first problem. We're dealing with the Japanese direct market. So we come down in the instruction manual, which again, the tuner failed to read. Very, very fundamentals. The same thing I tell clients to do if they buy parts and want to install themselves. Read the manual. There's usually details that you need to know. And so here it is. Here's how the plug and play adapter comes configured from Haltech with a jumper in the ACE configuration. The very next box is the alternative configuration S15 JDM SR20 DET, which is what we're dealing with. All right, BDE configuration. So, because that is not configured correctly in the jumpers, it is not getting the correct trigger signal, which the tack bouncing up and down should have been the first clue for the tuner if he knew what he was looking at. And the car's never going to start. Long story short on this one, they changed the jumper configuration. The car started, everything ran as it should in that sense, as far as the wiring and the Haltech. Um, so that was issue number one, roughly a month ago prior to my arrival in Japan. Fast forward. This is this is the car in question. This is a R34 GTT or GTST, however you want to call it, RB25 DET Neo, and we provided parts for this with a forward-facing Plasma Man manifold, Plasma Man fuel rail, throttle body, IDX injectors, IDX 1050 injectors specifically, radium multi-pump regulator, AAM 340 LPH fuel pump. Okay, so we received the car to get tuned. The owner complains that ever since the parts were installed, the car has no power. It's not good to drive. He thought it would be much more powerful on acceleration than it is, and just overall not happy with how the car is performing. Very, very, very typical kind of complaint coming into a tuning shop. So we look at the Haltech. Of course, the tune is locked. I already know this shop locks their tunes. On a street car, you're not hiding any proprietary information on a street car. I understand locking tunes maybe for a GT Cup cars or professional race teams where maybe you have very, very specific calibration data that you've dialed in over years. But this is a pretty standardized engine with bolt-on upgrades. There's absolutely no reason to lock the tune. There's other ways to protect the customer from going in and making changes and protect yourself as a tuning shop. That's a different discussion. So we wipe the tune, we reflash the Haltech back to default, remove the lock, and the firmware is out of date, of course. So we upgrade the firmware, which adds in different capabilities and fixes that have been done by Haltech. We check the WB1. The sensor for the WB1 is installed at the very, very end of the stock downpipe, below the 3 o'clock position. So what I mean by that is it's not 3 to 12 to 9, it is 3 to 6 to 9. So it's in the bottom portion of the downpipe, right? So below the horizontal plane. Take note of that, move on, and we go to start the car, do the base configuration, confirm timing and all of that. And I noticed that the car is idling at like 0.76 AFR lambda. So what does that mean? That means that he is using so much fuel, right, that this car is idling at lambda that is richer than what we would use for full boost in most cases. So we go to make adjustments, and first thing I do is now confirm the base fuel pressure. Now that we have the car idling, as I go to make adjustments on the fuel pressure regulator, I notice that there is no change in the fuel pressure despite any type of adjustment. Why? So that comes down to, again, failure to read the instructions on the provided material. This, give me 1 second to open this. This is the radium fuel pressure regulator that we had installed. So on this, you have ports A, B, C, D, and E. So the way they had this configured was port B was it went from the fuel pump to the fuel filter in the engine bay, from the fuel filter in the engine bay to the fuel rail, absolutely normal, absolutely fine. And then from the fuel rail back to port B, which is a high pressure in or out. Again, perfectly fine. Port C was the return from the fuel pressure regulator back to the fuel pump. Okay, again, fine. They had hooked the fuel pressure gauge to port A, which is a high pressure in and out. However, what they didn't account for was the fact they used an inline run like this. So they used an inline run, which I don't know why they didn't just put it inline, and then they put a female lock end cap on this end of the regulator. So what that caused, right, given the design of the fuel pressure regulator, was essentially like a vapor lock or a pressure lock on the gauge itself. It would not adjust up or down. It basically stayed at the running pressure, and no matter what changes you made, it never bled off the pressure, right? It had nowhere to bleed it off to. So it didn't confirm the base pressure. So now this raises my question of how was this car tuned by this tuner if they don't know what the base fuel pressure is? So you can't tune volumetric efficiency without knowing the base fuel pressure, right? Um, so we ended up moving this later on. We moved this to an inline setup coming off of the fuel rail where it should have been in the first place. Confirmed the gauge worked via a compressor with an air gun, and everything was hunky dory. We redid the plumbing a little bit, and we were able to adjust the fuel pressure. Cool. Now, during that hunt for why is the fuel pressure not move, we also, checked things like the fuel pump to make sure the installation was good and the hoses weren't crossed, we weren't feeding backwards through the fuel pressure regulator, something like that. I've seen a lot of weird stuff, and I'm sure most mechanics out there have. So the first thing I noticed, we pulled the fuel pressure or fuel pump out, excuse me. There is no filter sock on this fuel pump at all. Uh, the shop may try and say, "Oh, it was there, it fell off." Well, I went armpit deep with a flashlight in the fuel tank, and there's no sock at all anywhere, right? So not having a filter sock, whether he failed to put the filter sock on at all, or he didn't put the sear clip on it. I don't know. I don't know what the excuse could be for this. This is ridiculous. But essentially now, if you've looked inside of a 25-year-old plus Japanese fuel tank, some of them are pretty damn scary, man, with the amount of corrosion that's in there and everything else. Now there is no filtration protecting the pump going into your fuel system, which means the entire filtration is reliant on the in-engine bay fuel filter. Bad juju. Bad juju from the get-go. Um, Next thing I notice is the wiring. So he used these butt splice connectors here. Not what I would have done personally. Depending on what these are, they may or may not be fuel rated. The material of that sheathing itself, a professional shop, my opinion, and what the wall burrows come with and what we use in shop is a Delphi Metro Pack. The Delphi Metro Packs are designed to be in the fuel tank, and they work really, really well without degradation. And this provides a positive connection as well to protect that connection so you don't lose your fuel pump during driving. Um, Again, you can take that for what it's worth. As a professional, I tend to believe in crimping and connectors. That's again my personal opinion. And then additionally, while looking through the car and checking the plug and play adapter, we noticed the magnificent wiring done by this shop. They basically did a inline strip here on the yellow and red wire that you can see up front and just wrapped this line around it. So just twisted it together, essentially wrapped it around it. No tape, no solder, no crimp, which would be the right answer. Nothing, right? And then the same thing with the green, and then you can see the vampire connectors up here at the top as well. So very classic Japan, very amateur, very, very DIY, um, absolutely unacceptable from a shop that's going to be charging performance shop prices. Not to mention, unsafe if this was like a power feed or something, you could end up frying the ECU or frying the component that's attached at the end if that were to touch ground. So that's just it's not acceptable. And that kind of leads us back into the next point of discussion, which is the effects of the tuning and how this affected the VE model and what else we saw. So stay tuned for that as we get into it. Thanks. All right, guys. So this is the map that was on the car after I started working it. This was not the final map uh, for obvious reasons. Okay, so this is the revision prior to the final revision. So what we see here is a fairly typical kind of VE shape, right? It's a little sharp on the drop off. It's very sharp in the climb, and it's not perfectly smooth, right? You're not going to get that perfect world, perfect VE, smooth slope every time, but it should at least resemble the shape. And for the most part, it resembles the shape, right? So the VE model is not absolutely totally screwed up. Now, we talked about the idling before, and the idling on this car, you can see we had to come down to about a 44% VE, which is kind of low, honestly, in my experience for street cars. But even then, we could only get the car to happily idle at around, I believe we ended up at a 0.94 lambda, 0.95 lambda. So definitely not stoichiometric. He does use base gas, so that makes his stoichiometric ratio at 14.1 AFR, not 14.7, for those that didn't know, with an ethanol blend. So we are pretty close here, a little low, but I used a zero demand to make the base table overall smoother. And you see kind of the base table come through here, and then all of a sudden, as we cross into positive pressure, we have a jump, massive jump in VE. Almost what, 30 points? Almost 20 points? 20 points. So 20-point VE jump is massive. Why? So if the tuner had been looking at the data logs as he came through this, then he would notice, okay, here's our correction. The dark green is the most data points, right? Number of hits. And he comes through, comes through, comes through. And right as we hit one bar, all of a sudden we see a 4% adjustment for adding 4% fuel. All of a sudden a 23 to 35, all the way up to 50% adjustment for fuel. And why is that? That is because of a couple possibilities. One could be running out of injector. Absolutely. So we go into injector data here, and let's look at the average duty cycle. Across the board, we're only at 43% duty cycle, topping out at like 46, it looks like is our highest. Well under the 85% threshold that we typically use for performance cars. And we know the fuel pressure is not dropping off, not leaking for this size turbo with this boost, and we've already checked the entire thing from the pump forward for any kind of leaks, including in-tank leaks. So we're not losing fuel pressure. So what that leaves on the table is back pressure. This car, and the tuner should have advised the client of this, because this is where the boost level was set coming out of this particular Japanese shop, was around the 1.4 bar mark. The boost is being controlled by an external boost controller, not controlled by the Haltech. So in that Blitz controller, you have your gain, which is essentially your duty cycle. That gain was set to 69. 69 basically put the boost here. And you can tell by the back pressure that we really should have started, going back to the AFR map, we really should have stopped that at 1 bar, even possibly below 1 bar with the back pressure. This has a upgraded turbo, as stated before, on the stock manifold, with the stock cams, with the stock exhaust valves, with the stock downpipe, with a cat, and a non-free flowing catback exhaust, which by the time you get to the catback, it's really irrelevant anyway, unless it's hyper restrictive. But the stock downpipe is creating so much back pressure in the engine that you're essentially choking the engine out from being able to breathe at all, which is very, very, very dangerous to the engine. So the tuner should have advised the client that he needed a aftermarket downpipe to fit with his other upgrades and the upgraded turbo, and really lowered that boost pressure back down. Again, this just shows me that the tuner is not looking at his data logs. He's not really aware mathematically of what the VE value should look like and what the overall tune shape should look like. So we set the VE as high as we could, trying to push some fuel in there just in case. Within reason, I didn't add another 50% to this. Obviously, that would be ridiculous. and we turned down the boost a little bit. However, because we were able to dial in the ignition table, starting with a base of RB25 Neo engines I've done here on my dyno, we were able to pick up a lot of acceleration, responsiveness, the responsiveness, especially, thanks to Haltech's new map prediction model. Really, the car felt like a whole new car for the client. Client's extremely happy, knows what he needs to do moving forward, and we'll be hearing back from him to help him guide this car along its upgrade path in the future, so that we can get him the power that he wants and get this car to reach the goals that he's after. So, in conclusion, one shop claiming to be a professional, doing subpar wiring, not demonstrating a command of knowledge of the internal combustion engine process and how it all works together. Be careful where you spend your money, guys. Your tuner is your choice, of course, and always. Find a tuner that works with you. I am not everyone's tuner. As one of my other friends said on a post for his business, I'm very direct, and some people don't like that, and that's fine. But regardless of who you choose and how you want to do it, make sure you choose a tuner that's going to get you your money's worth. They're charging you the appropriate financial amount for their knowledge level as a tuner. Tuners come in all different levels of knowledge amounts, and I still have a million things to learn from the guys, working above me and my mentors. So be a smart consumer, watch your car, take care of your wallets, have a great day.